The river was swollen from days of rain, its surface shattered by wind and headlights slicing through the dark. When Mara Sullivan plunged into the water, the cold hit her like broken glass. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She only saw a small body thrashing near the embankment, arms flailing, a child's scream ripped in by panic. She reached him just as his strength gave out. The boy clung to her, nails digging into her coat as she dragged him toward the shore. His breathing was wrong. Too steady, too strong for someone who had nearly drowned. When his face tilted up and his eyes opened, they weren't wide with fear. They burned red. Mara recoiled, her heart hammering, but it was too late. The boy's gaze locked onto hers, and something unseen slid beneath her skin, like a scent she couldn't wash away. Engines growled above the riverbank. Dark vehicles lined the road. Shapes moved behind the lights, silent, waiting, not rushing to help. This wasn't a rescue. It was a retrieval. An hour earlier, Mara had been walking home because she couldn't afford the bus. Her phone was dying. Her rent was overdue. She had been counting steps instead of dreaming about tomorrow. Now cold water soaked her clothes. The boy's grip tightened, and every instinct screamed the same truth. Saving him had just signed her death warrant. The vehicles didn't rush in. They rolled to a stop with deliberate slowness, engines idling, headlights pinning the riverbank in white glare. Doors opened one by one. Men stepped out, not shouting, not running. They moved with the quiet certainty of people who knew nothing here could stop them. Mara backed away instinctively, boots slipping in the mud as she tightened her grip around the boy. His soaked clothes steamed faintly against her chest, and though the river still roared behind him, he was no longer thrashing. His breathing had evened out, shallow but steady. His fingers, cold and strong, curled into her sleeve like he was anchoring himself to her. A shape emerged last from the farthest vehicle. The air changed. Mara felt it before she understood it, a pressure, like the night itself was holding its breath. The man who stepped forward didn't hurry. He didn't need to. The others parted for him without a word, forming a loose corridor that led straight to the riverbank. He was tall, dressed simply, dark coat untouched by rain. His face was calm, almost expressionless, but not empty. It was a kind of stillness that came from absolute control, not indifference. When his eyes lifted and settled on the boy in Mara's arms, something in the world seemed to lock into place. The boy made a small sound. Not fear. Relief. He turned his face into her coat for half a second, then leaned toward the man, his body relaxing completely, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. The change was instant and undeniable. The trembling stopped. The panic drained away. Mara noticed because it made her chest tighten. The man stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the pale line of a scar at his throat, close enough to feel the cold roll off him, sharper than the river. "You shouldn't have touched him," he said. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It carried effortlessly over the sound of the water, smooth and precise, every word placed with intention. Mara swallowed. He was drowning. The man's gaze shifted to her then, fully, and she understood what prey felt like, not hunted, but assessed, measured, catalogued. He was being punished. The man replied. Something snapped behind her. He's a child. A flicker across his eyes. Not anger, not surprise. Amusement, perhaps, or curiosity. One of the men behind him moved suddenly, stepping forward too fast, hand drifting toward his coat. The man raised one finger. That was all. The other man froze instantly, head bowed, motion arrested as completely as if time itself had stopped around him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away. "This," the man said calmly, without looking back, "is why humans misunderstand authority. They mistake restraint for weakness." He lowered his hand. The man behind him exhaled shakily and stepped back into line. Mara's mouth had gone dry. She adjusted her grip on the boy, more defensively now, though she had no idea what she thought she could do. The man's attention returned to the child. "You frightened everyone," he said, not unkindly. The boy nodded, eyes downcast. "Come here." The boy hesitated only a moment before wriggling free of Mara's arms and stepping forward. The loss of his weight, made her stagger. She reached out without thinking, but the man's gaze flicked up, sharp as a blade. Her hand froze midair. The man crouched in front of the boy, dark coat pooling around him, and placed a hand on the child's shoulder. The contact was gentle, possessive. The boy leaned into it instinctively, as though he had always known where he belonged. Mara watched, stunned, as the red glow faded from the boy's eyes, dimming until they looked almost normal in the harsh light. "Did they hurt you?" the man asked. The boy shook his head. "Good." He rose smoothly to his feet and finally looked at Mara again. "You interfered in something you don't understand." "I didn't know," she said, her voice hoarse. "I thought—" "That," he said, cutting her off, "is irrelevant." Two men moved in closer, flanking her, not grabbing her, hurting, like she was something dangerous or contaminated. Fear slid coldly through her veins. "I saved him." "Yes," the man agreed. "You did." The way he said it made her skin crawl. "You carry his scent now," he continued, almost conversationally. "That makes you visible." Visible to what? She wanted to ask. But the answer was written the way every man here watched her, alert and calculating, like she was a liability that needed to be managed. "You don't get to just walk away," she said. A faint smile touched his mouth. It didn't soften his eyes. "No," he said. "You don't." He turned, resting one hand briefly on the boy's shoulder as he walked back toward the vehicles. The formation shifted smoothly, closing in around them. One of the men offered Mara a blanket, draping it over her shoulders without asking. Another took her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to make resistance pointless. She was guided forward, past the river, past the place where her normal life had ended without ceremony. As she was ushered into the back of a waiting vehicle, she caught one last glimpse of the man through the rain-streaked glass. He stood beside the boy, a hand resting protectively at the back of his neck, posture relaxed, command absolute. This wasn't a criminal cleaning up a mess. This was a king reclaiming his property. The door shut, the lock clicked, and the convoy pulled away, carrying her towards somewhere she had never chosen, and would not be allowed to leave. The drive lasted long enough for the cold to seep past a blanket and settle deep in Mara's bones. The windows were blacked out, the doors locked from the outside. No one spoke to her. No one needed to. Every turn, every smooth acceleration felt planned, inevitable, like she stepped onto a path that had been waiting for her long before she ever reached the river. When the vehicle finally slowed, she felt it before she saw it, a shift in pressure, in sound. The road changed beneath the tires, gravel crunching softly, then silence as gates opened somewhere ahead. The air grew cleaner, sharper, laced with pine and stone instead of exhaust and damp concrete. The doors opened. Mara stepped out into a courtyard carved from shadow and moonlight. The estate rose before her like something grown rather than built. Ancient stone walls wrapped in ivy, towers cutting into the night sky, windows dark and watchful. The place felt aware of her presence, as if she crossed into the territory of something that did not welcome trespassers. Theo was already out of the car. He stood close to the man she now understood she should fear, his small hand gripping the dark fabric of his coat. He looked warmer here, safer, like the walls themselves recognized him. Mara shivered, and not just from the cold. Inside, the air was heavy with history. Stone corridors stretched endlessly, lit by low, amber light that cast more shadow than warmth. The floors were worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. She could hear movement beyond the walls, soft, deliberate, too quiet to be human. She was brought to a long chamber lined with iron and glass. The man stood at the far end, Theo beside him, while others took up positions along the walls. Not guards, she realized, witnesses. "You are here," he said, "because you made contact." Mara lifted her chin. "I saved his life." "Yes." His gaze sharpened. "And in doing so, you entered a contract you did not know existed." She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. The words felt useless here. "There are laws," he continued, pacing slowly. "Old ones. You do not need to understand them. You need only obey them." One of the men stepped forward with a small blade. Mara tensed, heart stuttering, but the man merely gestured for her hand. When she hesitated, his eyes flicked toward Theo. Her hand moved on its own. The blade nicked her skin. Just enough. Blood welled, bright against pale flesh. The man didn't touch her, but he breathed in, slow and deliberate. The room changed. Mara felt it then unmistakably. A heat under her skin. A pull, like invisible threads tightening around her chest. Every eye in the room snapped to her, pupils dilating, focus sharpening. "You see," the man said quietly. "His scent clings to you. It will not fade." Theo looked at her, guilt flickering across his young face. "What does that mean?" Mara asked. "It means," the man replied, "that if you leave this estate, you will be followed. If you hide, you will be found. If you are alone, you will be taken apart piece by piece until nothing remains." Her breath came shallow. "So I'm a prisoner." "No," he said. "You are protected. For now." The distinction felt meaningless. "You will stay," he continued. "You will not touch the child without permission. You will not leave the grounds. You will not speak of what you see here. Break any of these rules, and protection is withdrawn." Mara looked around at the stone walls, the silent figures, the boy who had changed everything by existing. Escape flickered through her mind, then died under the weight of what she felt pressing in from all sides. Theo stepped closer to her, just enough for her to feel the warmth of him again. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She closed her hand into a fist, feeling the faint throb where the blade had kissed her skin. Somewhere deep inside, fear settled into something colder, heavier, understanding. This wasn't about kindness, or justice, or saving anyone. This was about survival. And survival, she realized as the doors closed behind her, would require obedience. They gave her a room with a bed that felt unused and a window that didn't open. The stone walls held the cold, no matter how many blankets she wrapped around herself. Hours passed without a clock to measure them. Time here didn't behave the way it should. Mara didn't sleep. She listened instead to footsteps that never echoed, to murmured voices behind walls too thick to hear through, to the estate itself settling and breathing like a living thing. Every so often she became aware of that pressure again, the invisible awareness that reminded her she was seen even when alone. It wasn't until the door opened quietly that she realized she'd been holding her breath. Theo stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing clothes that were too big for him. He hesitated, eyes darting behind him as if expecting to be pulled back at any second. "They said I could come," he whispered. Mara pushed herself upright. Are you hungry?" He nodded. They brought food a few minutes later. Simple things. Soup that steamed faintly. Bread. Water. Theo ate carefully, like he was afraid of spilling or wasting any of it. But his hunger showed in the way his hands trembled and how quickly the bowl emptied. He didn't eat like a monster. He ate like a scared kid who hadn't been sure when his next meal would come. Later, when exhaustion finally dragged at his small frame, he curled up on the edge of her bed without asking. His body was warm, almost feverish, and when his breathing slowed, it hitched every so often like he was fighting something even in sleep. That was when the nightmares came. He thrashed, muttering under his breath, fingers digging into the blanket. Once, he cried out sharply, eyes snapping open, pupils blown wide with fear. Mara reacted before she thought, pulling him against her chest, murmuring nonsense just to keep him anchored. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe. You're not alone." He clung to her like the river was still beneath him. After that, he didn't let go. The days blurred. She wasn't allowed beyond certain corridors, but Theo was allowed to come and go, and more often than not, he chose her room. He asked small questions, ordinary ones, what her favorite food was, whether the world outside still had parks, if people laughed differently where she came from. Sometimes he went quiet instead, watching her with an intensity that didn't belong to someone his age. "You're not scared of me," he said once. Mara hesitated, then shook her head. "You're just a kid." He looked down at his hands. "They say I'm not." She didn't argue with the words. She just reached out and straightened the sleeve he'd chewed on nervously. At night, she noticed things she couldn't explain. He didn't seem to breathe when he slept, at least not the way she did. His heartbeat, when she pressed her ear lightly to his chest during a nightmare, was too slow, too strong. And sometimes, when he was upset, the lights in the room flickered like they were reacting to him. But when he laughed, quiet, surprised, like he wasn't used to the sound, none of that mattered. He trusted her more than anyone else in the estate. He followed her footsteps, waited for her approval, calm when she spoke, even when others couldn't reach him. That scared her more than the rules. One evening, as the light outside the window faded into deep blue, he sat beside her, knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the glass. "They won't hurt you," he said suddenly. Mara's chest tightened. "You don't know that." He turned to her then, fear naked on his face. "You can't leave." She swallowed. "I don't get to decide that." His fingers found her sleeve again, gripping hard. "Please," he said, voice breaking. "If you go, they'll take everything that makes me feel normal." The weight of his trust settled over her, heavier than any chain. Mara looked down at the boy who wasn't supposed to exist, who wasn't supposed to feel this deeply, who had already been used as a weapon before he understood what the word meant. "I'm still here," she said quietly. But as he leaned into her, relief washing through his small body, she realized the truth she hadn't wanted to face. If she died, or disappeared, this child would be completely alone. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. A servant didn't arrive for the morning shift. No explanation. No raised voices. Just an empty corridor where footsteps should have been. Later, a guard was reassigned without comment, his post filled by someone Mara had never seen before, someone who watched the walls instead of the people. Whispers began to move through the estate like drafts through stone. Mara heard fragments when she passed open doors or lingered too long near stairwells. Names spoken once, never repeated. A trading house that went dark overnight. A convoy that never reached its destination. An emissary who arrived unannounced and left as ash. Sebastian Vale remained unchanged. He still moved through the halls with the same controlled calm, still issued commands in low voices that were obeyed instantly. But the air around him felt tighter now, stretched thin by something unspoken. When he stood at the high windows overlooking the grounds, his gaze lingered longer than before, as if measuring distances only he could see. Theo noticed too. He became quieter, more alert. He flinched at sudden sounds. His nightmares returned, sharp at this time, full of fire and shouting and hands pulling him away while he screamed for someone who never came. Mara woke more than once with him shaking in her arms, whispering apologies that made no sense. "They're arguing," he said once, eyes fixed on the door. "Who is?" Mara asked. "Everyone who wants me." The world beyond this state began to feel larger, darker. Mara learned that Sebastian was not alone in his kind, that there were other houses, other rulers, bound by treaties written in blood and broken just as easily. Power here wasn't held by strength alone. It was traded, stolen, leveraged, and Theo was leverage. Mara overheard the name by accident, spoken with careful disdain by a pair of men who hadn't realized she was close enough to hear. Dominic Cross. The way they said it was different, sharper, like testing a blade's edge. After that, the signs became harder to ignore. Burned messages arrived sealed in wax that had melted before delivery. Symbols carved into the stone walls at the far edge of the grounds, erased before dawn but never fast enough. A body found near the outer forest, drained and displayed like a warning no one would admit was meant to be read. Sebastian tightened security. Curfews were enforced. Routes changed. The estate drew inward, coiling like a thing preparing to strike or defend. Mara was moved twice without explanation. New rooms, new corridors. Always closer to Theo. Always watched. "You're safer near him," one of the guards told her quietly, not meeting her eyes. That was when she understood. She wasn't a guest or a prisoner. She was insurance. If Sebastian was challenged, Theo was a prize. And if Theo was a prize, then Mara, marked human, visible, was the weakness that could be exploited. The realization settled into her bones. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows and the estate braced itself in silence, a single envelope was delivered. It wasn't carried by hand. It appeared on the long table in the chamber like it had always been there. No seal, no signature, just a single line burned into the paper so deeply it had nearly eaten through. "I know what you pulled from the river." Sebastian read it without expression. The room seemed to darken around him. Mara felt it then, the certainty cold and absolute. She was no longer invisible. Somewhere beyond the walls, someone was watching, and now they knew her name. They didn't tell her it was dangerous. They told her it was necessary. Sebastian summoned her at dusk, when the estate was washed in fading light, and the grounds were quiet enough to hear the wind threading through the trees. Theo stood beside him, small fingers clenched tightly in Mara's sleeve, his unease radiating through the contact. "We're leaving the estate," Sebastian said. Mara's pulse spiked. "Why?" "Visibility," he replied calmly. "Silence invites speculation. Appearances maintain balance." She understood the words, even if she hated what they meant. Balance here was not peace. It was deterrence, and deterrence required proof that nothing was wrong. "You'll stay close," he added, eyes flicking briefly to her. "Both of you." It wasn't until they were moving, cars rolling through open gates, the estate shrinking behind them, that she realized no one had actually asked for her consent. The location was old, a stone hall nestled at the edge of neutral territory, lit with warm lanterns and filled with voices that didn't belong to humans. Mara felt them watching the moment she stepped inside. Not openly, not yet, just awareness, like the prickle between her shoulder blades when someone stood too close. Theo pressed against her side, gaze darting everywhere at once. "Eyes forward," Sebastian murmured to him. Mara noticed how many exits there were, how few guards stood near them, how far Sebastian positioned himself, present but not shielding, like a chess player willing to sacrifice a piece to see who reached for it. They moved through the hall slowly. Conversations dipped and rose as they passed. Smiles lingered too long. Glasses paused midair. Mara caught a reflection in polished stone, pale, tense, unmistakably human among creatures who hid their hunger behind refinement. She felt it then, that pull under her skin, the mark tightening like a held breath. Someone was close. A man brushed past her, shoulder grazing hers just enough to feel deliberate. His eyes met hers for half a second, too long, too intent. She smelled smoke and iron. Theo whimpered. Mara's hand tightened around his. "Stay with me," she whispered. The hall shifted. Guards repositioned subtly, blocking some paths while opening others. A woman laughed too loudly nearby. Somewhere behind them, a door opened that hadn't been there a moment ago. Theo stumbled. Mara barely caught him before another set of hands reached out of the crowd. Fast, practiced, confident. Fingers brushed Theo's sleeve. Mara reacted without thinking. She twisted, dragging Theo back against her chest, her elbow driving hard into the space where the hand had been. The man hissed, vanishing instantly into the press of bodies. But the damage was done. The illusion shattered. Shouts rose, not loud, but sharp, controlled. Guards moved, weapons half-drawn. Sebastian turned, his gaze sweeping the room with lethal focus. Theo buried his face in Mara's coat, shaking. "We're leaving," Sebastian said, his voice cutting through the noise. They didn't walk back to the cars. They retreated. The ride back was silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. Theo didn't let go of Mara the entire time. When the estate gates finally closed behind them, she expected relief. It didn't come. Inside, security doubled. Doors sealed. Routes changed again. The estate no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a target. Mara stood at the window later that night, watching the darkness press against the glass, understanding settling heavily in her chest. They had tested the waters, and next time they wouldn't miss. The estate was no longer safe, and whatever was coming wouldn't end quietly. The message arrived at dawn, not carried, not delivered. It appeared on the inner gate, nailed through stone with a blade thick enough to split rock. By the time the guard saw it, the sun was already climbing, and the paper had begun to curl at the edges, scorched from the inside out. Mara watched from the corridor as Sebastian read it. This time, he didn't hide his reaction. The air around him went still, like the world itself was bracing. The guards nearest the gate stiffened, every muscle pulled tight, weapons half raised without being told. Theo pressed closer to Mara's side, fingers digging into her coat. "What does it say?" she asked. Sebastian folded the message once. Carefully. An invitation. To what? To war. The name was spoken openly now. Dominic Cross. No whispers. No caution. The provocation was deliberate. Territory breached. Rules mocked. Patience tested. Reports followed quickly after. An outpost burned before sunrise. A lesser house, slaughtered for refusing to choose a side. Blood spilled not for necessity, but for spectacle. Dominic wasn't hiding anymore. He wanted Sebastian to respond. Tension snapped through the estate like a live wire. Guards doubled again. Windows sealed. Ancient mechanisms groaned awake beneath the stone floors. Whatever had been sleeping here for centuries was stirring, sharpening itself. Mara felt it all closing in. That night, she found Sebastian alone in the long chamber where the windows looked out over the forest. He stood rigid, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the dark line of trees, as if daring them to move. "You knew this would happen," she said. He didn't turn. "Yes." "You still took us outside the walls." "Yes." Her chest burned. "You used us." That made him look at her. Really look. "Everything in this world is used." He said evenly. "Survival depends on it." "I'm not one of your pieces," she snapped. The fear she'd been swallowing finally broke loose, sharp and uncontrollable. "You knew they'd come for him. And for me. You knew." "And you are still alive," he replied, which means the strategy worked. Theo flinched at the cold certainty in his voice. Mara stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Say that again when they tear him out of my arms. Say it when I'm dead on your doorstep." Silence slammed down between them. For a moment, she thought he might strike her, or have someone else do it. The guards tensed at the edges of the room, waiting for a signal that didn't come. "You are marked," Sebastian said slowly. "That makes you a risk." "I know," she shot back, "but I am not disposable." Something flickered across his face then. Not anger. Something older. He looked at Theo, at the way the boy stood half in behind her, eyes bright with fear and loyalty tangled together. "You have leverage," Sebastian said quietly, "and leverage attracts knives." "So does weakness," Mara replied. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "You can't protect him by pretending he's just another asset. And you can't protect me by pretending I don't matter." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind outside, pressing against the glass. Sebastian exhaled slowly. "If I choose protection," he said, "I lose control." "And if you don't," Mara said, "you lose everything." The words hung between them, heavy with truth. The first alarm cut through the estate like a scream. Then another, and another. The floor beneath their feet shuddered as something exploded along the outer perimeter. Shouts rose. Doors slammed. The deep, ancient bell buried in the stone began to toll, slow and furious. Theo clutched her hand. "They're here," he whispered. Sebastian straightened. All hesitation burned away, power snapping back into place like a drawn blade. "Stay with him," he ordered. The lights flickered. The walls trembled. Somewhere beyond the stone, something tore through iron and blood alike. And as the alarms wailed and the estate lurched into chaos, Mara understood the truth with terrifying clarity. Everything was about to burn. The estate erupted into motion. Stone corridors that had been silent for centuries filled with shouts and the clash of metal. Ancient doors slammed shut, while others burst open under forcemen to breach, not knock. Fire bloomed somewhere deep in the west wing, its orange glow crawling along the ceilings like a living thing. Mara ran. She didn't remember deciding to move, only the sound of Theo crying out behind her and the certainty that if she stopped, he would be gone. Guards surged past them in both directions, some bleeding, some dragging others who no longer moved. The smell of smoke mixed with iron until it coated her tongue. "This way!" a voice shouted. A familiar face appeared ahead, one of the estate's senior wardens, trusted, long-standing. He waved urgently, already pulling open a side passage. "We'll take him to the lower vaults," he said. "They won't reach us there." Theo hesitated. Mara did too. The mark beneath her skin burned. It wasn't pain, more like pressure, a warning tightening around her ribs. She caught a glimpse of movement behind the warden's eyes, something sharp and eager that didn't belong to fear. "No," she said. The warden's smile didn't falter. "There's no time." Mara twisted suddenly, shoving Theo behind her as the warden lunged. His hand snapped out fast enough to blur, fingers curling to seize the boy's throat. Mara slammed her full weight into him. They hit the wall hard. Stone cracked. The warden snarled, no longer pretending, eyes flaring with predatory light as he turned on her instead. Stronger, faster, confident she was nothing. She grabbed the torch mounted beside them and smashed it into his face. Fire roared. He screamed, high and furious, as flames licked up his coat. He staggered back, momentarily blinded, and Mara didn't hesitate. She dragged Theo down a side corridor she hadn't been meant to notice, slamming the door behind them as the scream cut off abruptly. Someone else finished it. They didn't stop running. The estate had become a maze of destruction. Ceilings collapsed. Windows shattered inward as shadows poured through the gaps, moving too fast to track. Somewhere nearby, a vampire shrieked as sunlight from a ruptured skylight caught him full in the chest, reducing him to ash in seconds. Theo stumbled, terror slowing his legs. "I can't," he sobbed. "Yes, you can," Mara said, hoisting him up without breaking stride. "You stay with me. You hear me?" They burst into the inner hall, just as a figure dropped from the balcony above. One of Dominic's hunters, eyes locked on Theo, lips pulled back from sharp teeth. Mara didn't think. She veered hard, throwing herself sideways as the creature struck where they had been a second earlier. Marble shattered. Theo screamed. Mara grabbed a fallen blade, not elegant, not balanced, and drove it upward into the creature's throat with every ounce of strength she had. The vampire recoiled, shrieking, staggering back into a shaft of burning light pouring through the broken roof. Ash scattered on the air. Silence followed, thick and ringing. Sebastian appeared at the far end of the hall, blood staining his hands, his coat torn, eyes blazing with fury and something close to awe. He took in the scene in a single glance. The ash, the fallen blade, Theo clinging to Mara like she was the last solid thing in the world. "You chose," he said. Mara didn't lower the weapon. Her hand shook violently now that the adrenaline had nowhere to go. "I told you I wasn't disposable." Sebastian stepped closer. The chaos seemed to pull away from him, as if the violence itself knew better than to touch him now. "You saved him," he said. "Not a question." "I would do it again," she replied. "Every time." For a moment, the world held still. Then Sebastian reached out and took her wrist. She flinched, but he didn't hurt her. He turned her hand palm up and drew a blade across his own skin. Dark blood welled, thick and shimmering with power that made the air hum. "This will bind you to my house," he said quietly. "It will make you visible in a way you cannot undo." Mara met his gaze. "I'm already visible." Sebastian pressed his bleeding palm to hers. Fire tore through her veins. The mark burned itself into her skin, into her bones, into something deeper she hadn't known she possessed. The estate seemed to exhale as the bond snapped into place, ancient and irrevocable. Theo gasped, eyes wide, then relaxed as if some great tension had finally been cut. Sebastian released her slowly. "You are protected now," he said. "By blood." Mara looked down at her hand, at the faint, glowing symbol already fading into her skin. She felt different, stronger, and as the screams and flames continued to rage through the estate, one truth settled with chilling clarity. She was no longer just human. The fighting narrowed toward the heart of the estate, as if drawn there by intention rather than chance. Smoke curled along the vaulted ceilings, and the ancient stone groaned under wounds that had never been meant to suffer. Mara stayed between Theo and the world, her body moving with a certainty that hadn't existed before the mark burned into her skin. She felt him coming before she saw him. The air thickened. The light dimmed unnaturally, as if something vast and patient had stepped between the flames and the walls. The remaining guards fell back without being ordered to, instinct screaming what protocol no longer mattered. Dominic Cross emerged from the smoke like a blade drawn slow from a sheath. He looked nothing like the monster Mara had imagined. His movements were unhurried, almost bored, eyes cold with the confidence of someone who had never truly believed he could lose. Ash dusted his coat. Blood marked his cuffs, not his own. "So this is her," he said, gaze sliding over Mara with clinical interest. "The human who upset the board." Theo whimpered. Dominic smiled. "Ah, there you are." Sebastian stepped forward, power rolling off him in waves that made the stone vibrate. "You crossed too many lines." Dominic laughed softly. "You built your empire on lines. I simply stopped pretending they mattered." He moved faster than Mara could track, until he didn't. The mark flared hot, warning her a heartbeat before his strike landed where she'd been standing a second earlier. She twisted, dragging Theo with her as the stone floor shattered under Dominic's blow. Sunlight speared to the ruptured ceiling above, harsh and unforgiving. Dominic hissed, retreating just enough to avoid it. "You're careless," he sneered. "Playing at family makes you weak." Sebastian advanced, forcing him back step by step, herding him toward the widening break overhead. The fight between them was nothing like what Mara had seen before. No wasted movement, no fury without purpose. Power met power, ancient and terrible. But it was Mara who saw the angle. The sun was climbing. The ceiling was fractured but unstable. And Dominic, for all his confidence, had forgotten one thing. Humans broke rules. She shoved Theo into Sebastian's shadow and ran, not away, but toward the fallen debris littering the hall. With strength she didn't fully understand yet, she wrenched a massive iron support loose and drove it into the weakened stone. The ceiling gave way. Light poured down like judgment. Dominic screamed, not in pain, but in disbelief, as the sun claimed him fully. His body burned, cracking apart, ash scattering violently on the air until nothing remained but silence and scorched stone. The world seemed to breathe again. When the dust settled, Theo stared at the empty space, trembling. "Is it over?" Sebastian knelt in front of him, placing both hands on the boy's shoulders. "Yes." Theo looked up at him, then at Mara. His eyes shimmered, not red, not fully human either. Something between. Something new. "He doesn't belong to any house," Sebastian said quietly. "Not fully. He's what they feared." "A hybrid," Mara whispered. Sebastian nodded. "Rare, powerful, and hunted from birth." Silence stretched. Sebastian turned to Mara then, his expression unreadable. "The mark binds you, but it does not enslave you. You may leave. I will ensure you are never hunted." Mara looked down at Theo, at the way his fingers had twisted into her sleeve without her noticing. "And if I stay?" she asked. "Then you choose this life," Sebastian said, with all its darkness. Mara felt the mark pulse, not painfully this time, but warm, steady. For the first time since the river, it didn't feel like a warning. She knelt in front of Theo. "What do you want?" He didn't hesitate. "You." Mara stood and faced Sebastian. "Then I stay." The fires would take time to extinguish. The estate would bear scars. But as dawn crept in through broken stone, Mara felt something she hadn't expected. Belonging. The mark on her skin no longer felt like a curse. It felt like a promise. One choice had changed everything. And standing there with the child she had saved and the world she had claimed, Mara knew, with absolute certainty, it had been worth it.